Something we're probably
Okay. We can move Mark. Where do you want him to be for Q&A? Do you want him to sit there, or do you want him to come up to the stage? Okay. So everyone will come up to the stage for Q&A.
Okay. Well, that's all it is.
Yeah, at the very end. Just Jason makes it. I know there's some corners who
they were going to
keep us
because it's like Jews for doing Korean,
great.
then we have
Reporters, right?
Kevin, you know, Kevin to shoot.
Yes.
That's really good. Yeah, he's a good speaker.
Yeah. She was the moderator. Yeah.
I heard that she was like,
Please email me in the future if I, for some reason, horribly left you off of the list. In Hong Kong or wherever.
Yeah, it's not a problem. I spent a big chunk of yesterday with, oh, good. He's,
We can use that.
healthcare and his family for 5 years, you know, from his 11.
See you yet.
Right? So it's, you know,
I mean,
disaster. Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah. I'll reach out. He's a good guy. I'm glad you got that. Did that go well?
I know, I'm the same way, I'm like, Charlie.
Oh, no, you're fine.
You know what they said? Yeah.
Lease.
Police. Oh, that's what he couldn't get a negotiation. He couldn't get a president. Like, I was there a month ago.
To get out there, we'll talk about she'll talk about what happened yesterday, what people should be doing forward to.
And he lives by a
Yeah,
base.
and Rezaian.
That's not really great.
No.
We
And I got all of you guys.
so then we'll just lose contact.
Exactly, and don't direct questions.
Hey, one quick thing.
So I explained to
She runs the. Just opened up 2 months ago. Yeah, yeah, but that's. How many people would have? Oh, everybody. No, yeah, that's okay.
I'll string someone and I'll see what it is.
She's on her. I think so. I mean, we're supposed to go like 9:10, and I think we can have density. Okay, let me tell people. Hey, it'd be a good time to take your seats now. Thanks. There's plenty of seats here. You just have to be neighborly. Okay. Good morning, and welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Bill McCarran. I'm the director of the new Press Freedom Center at the National Press Club. For 117 years, the club has been an active participant in press freedom issues and is now taking the extraordinary step of creating a center to be the focus of all of those activities. We're very excited about it and very glad that we have this appropriate and important event to begin our next chapter. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out that our president, Emily Wilkins, is here, and she deserves a round of applause for all the work she did to put together this center. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emily. Several times over the past year, the Press Club has called for the immediate release of Jimmy Lai, former publisher of Apple Daily, who's being held in jail in Hong Kong. Today's program is about the status of that case. We have a fascinating panel. It includes Jimmy's son and chief advocate, Sebastien, the head of international legal team, Caoilfhionn Gallagher, and Jason Rezaian, who is currently dodging a tree that's fallen across Massachusetts Avenue and is on his way, and will join us as the last speaker. The case has been fascinating to follow. It's time that it be resolved. There have been very interesting developments since we announced that this event was going to take place. You'll hear about some of them today. And the propitious timing of this panel is that today the trial for Jimmy Lai resumes in Hong Kong. It's my honor to welcome back Jimmy's son, Sebastien, his chief advocate, and you could not ask for a better spokesperson for the cause. His heart and soul is in this, and we're so glad that he could join us here today for this inaugural event at the Press Club. Sebastien, please join us. Please welcome him.
So first of all, thank you all for coming. Yesterday we just saw the start of the trial. One of the things that it was a bittersweet moment for me, because one of the things that I did worry about was that, how my father was going to be after having been in solitary confinement for almost 4 years now. You see, the goal of solitary confinement is to tell you that the rest of the world doesn't care about you, that you're just by yourself, that what you did, what you stood for, didn't matter, and this is your life from now until the day you die. So it's aimed to break you. I mean, it's aimed to break you physically. It's aimed to break you mentally. It's aimed to break you spiritually. And from the news that we've received from the court, though my father's physical health has gotten much worse, he is unbroken spiritually and mentally. And so I think reading one comment of what he said that I saw yesterday encapsulates his belief and the importance of what Hong Kong is doing to him more than I can. So when he was asked about the core values of Apple Daily and those of the people of Hong Kong, he said that it's carved into their hearts because they lived under the institutions of the British colony. And then when he was pressed to elaborate what those values were, he said rule of law, freedom, pursuit of democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. And look, this trial is about these freedoms. It's about a city that is now cracking down on these freedoms, and a people that can no longer speak because they don't have these freedoms available to them. So, in this very, very dark place, I just wanted to thank all of you for shining a light on what is happening. Cheers.
Thank you, Sebastien. We're now going to be joined by Caoilfhionn Gallagher.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to start by thanking Bill and Emily. We're so grateful to you for hosting us today. And this is the right place to have this discussion. Many of you will have seen the images of imprisoned journalists on your way in. And those of you who spend time here know that you come through and you see the roll call of people imprisoned for being journalists, for speaking truth to power, exactly what this brave man has done, and why we're now approaching 4 consecutive years of him being in prison for being a journalist and for running a newspaper with a pro-democracy, anti-corruption editorial line that stood up to Beijing. And something I always find so moving when I'm here is on multiple occasions I've been here and I've seen photographs of people who we in the Press Club and others worldwide stand in solidarity with and who the Press Club is campaigning for. And then we have the pleasure of seeing people released. So not so long ago, we saw out there pictures of Evan. We saw pictures of Also. We obviously have seen very recently Evan, Also, US National Marine Paul Whelan, and many others, including journalist Vladimir Kara-Murza, a British national with very close US ties, now returned home to their families thanks to political will, gumption, steel, and creative thinking. So we couldn't be in a better place. Of course, we're going to be joined shortly by my friend and colleague who we work with on many of these cases, Jason Rezaian, himself as someone who is a member of the club no one wants to be in, who 10 years ago was imprisoned in Iran. And I just wanted to begin by saying how incredibly inspiring I, and I know many others in the room, find it that people who've walked through fire, like Jason Rezaian has, and like so many others who come here to the press club have, rather than just going to their own comfortable lives, decide actually that they want to campaign for people like Jimmy and for others who are going through precisely what they went through. We were joined last night here in DC by Paul Whelan, so same thing. And it's incredibly inspiring to see people who know precisely what Sebastian's going through, who know what Jimmy Lai is going through, and who want to stand up and be counted. So Bill and Emily, for bringing us all together and for all you do, could I start by giving you a round of applause? So before we turn to Jason talking about the human element and how he knows precisely what Jimmy Lai is going through and the importance of international solidarity, I wanted to cover three brief things. The first is just to give you a little context about the background and why we are where we are with Jimmy Lai. Second is where we're now at in the national security law trial. We've just had day one of it resuming, so day one of the defence case. And then thirdly, I just want to turn to not being a believer in preaching to the converted, what the converted can do and what we in the room can do to try to change the grim trajectory, which if something does not change is going to result in this brave man dying behind bars in Hong Kong in solitary confinement for being a journalist and for doing a job which is so dear to so many of you in the room. So first of all, about the context, Jimmy Lai was targeted for decades because of his work, because of his writing, because of his media ownership of Apple Daily and Next Magazine, and because of his peaceful pro-democracy campaigning. Now, his political awakening came in 1989 with the Tiananmen Square massacre. We've just seen the 35th anniversary of that this year. And he felt, when he saw what happened in 1989, that he needed to put his money where his mouth was and speak truth to power. And he founded his media empire precisely because... Hi, Jason. He founded his media empire precisely because he wanted to ensure that there was a way to stand up to Beijing's leaders. And right from the outset, his media work, right from the outset, 1989, 1990, spoke truth to power in Beijing. So he immediately was involved in writing pieces which criticized Li Peng, the butcher of Beijing. And what we saw over decades with Apple Daily and with Next Magazine was punchy, pro-democracy, anti-corruption, really incredibly brave journalism. And the authorities hated him for it. Now, we all know in this room that the journalists and media owners tread on some pretty powerful toes, and authorities tend to hate them for it. And we saw a full range of actions against Jimmy Lai over decades, and indeed against his family, including firebombing of his home and business, including multiple attempts to kind of strangle his sources of income, intimidate his advertisers, and so on. What we've seen in the last 4 years is the most powerful tool of all, and that is using the law against him. And what we've really seen is lawfare, weaponization of the law against Jimmy Lai, simply for doing his job, for being a journalist, for running a newspaper with a pro-democracy, anti-corruption editorial line and standing up to Beijing. And that is why, since August 2020, we have seen a barrage of spurious lawsuits against him. We've seen, first of all, there have been 3 different types of lawsuits. We've seen, first of all, a whole series of cases against him for peaceful protest. They're all sentences that he's already served and that, in fact, he's finished serving 2 years ago. But they are ludicrous sentences simply for standing up for democratic values in a peaceful way. I'll just give you one example. For attending a Tiananmen Square vigil for 15 minutes, lighting a candle and saying a prayer, he received a 13-month custodial sentence. So that's the kind of regime that you're dealing with. He secondly received completely spurious conviction on a wholly spurious fraud charge based on a lease violation. Now, this is a new tactic which I'm seeing in many of my cases, because what we're routinely now seeing is authorities, instead of using traditional legal weapons like criminal defamation, for example, or even counter-terrorism laws. They also try to use other laws which discredit the journalist. So that's why my client Maria Ressa in the Philippines is accused of being a tax evader. That's why my client Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala is accused of being a fraudster. And precisely that tactic has also been used against Jimmy Lai. The idea is if you damage the messenger, then you damage the message, and people will be less trusting in their journalism, in their writing, in their words, in their media publications. So that's exactly what we've seen. But the third type of case is the national security law and sedition case. And that's the most serious of all because it carries a potential life sentence. So I just wanted to turn briefly now to the trial. The trial eventually started on Monday, the 18th of December, 2023, after long delays. After Jimmy Lai by that time had already spent 3 years in solitary confinement as an elderly man in his late 70s. Finally began then. The prosecution said it was going to take 80 days. It should have been over by Easter this year. But Easter came and went. The trial is continuing. The prosecution case itself took more than 80 days. And we've then had a 5.5-month hiatus with no evidence whatsoever until today, when the trial restarted and when the defence case has finally got to start. So this has been an exercise in foot dragging, and there is a real concern that one of the tactics may well be to wait it out in the hope that this is a Liu Xiaobo situation and that he simply dies behind bars before this matter gets resolved. And we cannot let that tactic work. So we're now into the defence case. Many of you will have seen the reports and may have seen some of the images today, and you will have seen the reports that Jimmy Lai looks noticeably thinner than before. We all know he's diabetic, 77, solitary confinement. That raises very serious issues about potential risk to life and risk to health for him. There's a hugely increased morbidity risk when you have an elderly diabetic prisoner in prolonged solitary confinement. International law says you shouldn't be in solitary confinement for more than 15 days. He has been in solitary confinement for almost 4 years, over 1,400 days. That's what we're dealing with. Vladimir Kara-Murza spent 9 months in solitary confinement, and when Sebastien met him recently, I know he was horrified at the idea that Jimmy Lai has been enduring this for 4 years. But despite that, and despite their attempts to break his body, his spirit is unbroken. We heard defiant words today where he talked about the principles which underpinned Apple Daily right from the outset. It's that story I've given you a quick summary of about Tiananmen Square. He spoke, as you've heard from Sebastien, about the core values which have always underpinned his work as a journalist. And we're now starting into his reply to the frankly ludicrous charges against him, because really what we've seen in the prosecution case has been 6 months of an allegation of conspiracy to commit journalism and conspiracy to raise human rights concerns with human rights organisations and with politicians around the world. Now, these are not criminal activities. These are actions which are protected under international law and which Hong Kong purports to protect under its own laws, under the Basic Law. So what we're now seeing is Jimmy Lai fighting back against that. And we don't know precisely how long that will take, but it's worth saying that we do not believe that this case is going to be resolved in a courtroom in Hong Kong. This is a trial which should not be happening. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention made clear on Friday night Jimmy Lai is unlawfully detained, has been unlawfully detained for 4 years. This trial should not be happening. We agree with the United Nations. Even by saying we agree with the United Nations, in the new Hong Kong, we're probably committing a criminal offence under the national security law, because they believe even engaging with the United Nations equals collusion with foreign forces. They believe even having a meeting with Nancy Pelosi equals collusion with foreign forces. They believe speaking to members of the European Parliament equals collusion with foreign forces. And that's why I used that phrase, a bully state, earlier. This is a bully state. And what we are seeing is a bully prosecution against a man for doing his job well and brilliantly. And then just finally, I just wanted to, before handing over to Jason, I just think about what we can do. The scenes we've seen this week in relation to the Hong Kong 45 sentenced yesterday, the ludicrous scenes that we saw with journalists being ushered out of the room when Prime Minister Keir Starmer from the UK raised the case of Jimmy Lai with President Xi, all show that China does not want the world to see what's happening in this Hong Kong courtroom. And we want the world to see what's happening in this Hong Kong courtroom. And we want all of you to shout from the rooftops about what a disgrace this case is and why it is simply not in China or Hong Kong's interests to continue targeting Jimmy Lai in this way. Jimmy Lai should be immediately and unconditionally released. This trial should not run for a day longer, and for every day it does continue, we need to tell this story. Jimmy Lai has been a brilliant storyteller since 1989. Now it's time that we tell his story, shout it from the rooftops. Thank you.
Thank you, Keelan. Next speaker we'll have is Jason Rezaian. He is now Director of Press Freedom Initiatives at the Washington Post, and I'm happy to say he's a chair of the advisory board for the new venture, the Press Freedom Center at the National Press Club. Jason.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. I want to welcome Sebastien and Caoilfhionn back to the club, back to town. You talked about 4 years in solitary confinement. I spent 7 weeks in solitary confinement, and I can tell you that it is the epitome of torture. It is the worst thing that you can do to a fellow human being. And the fact that Jimmy has endured this for 4 years now, as someone who, maybe the only person in the room, I hope, that has spent a single day in solitary confinement, this is not something that you can wrap your head around unless you've experienced it. So I have to take a moment and just think about that. As I walked in a bit late this morning, I think it's that time in solitary confinement that continues to play tricks on my concept of time, distance, space. And it's 10 years for me since that happened. And it continues to have a massive effect on my life. So I want to start just with thinking about the personal for a moment, because this is a human life, someone who dedicated his life to freedom, to speaking truth to power, and to raising the voices of his fellow Hong Kong citizens. It's a shocking affront to all the things that we hold dear here in the United States. Caoilfhionn talked about the importance of getting on the rooftops and shouting Jimmy's name and calling for his release. I wish that it wasn't necessary to do that. And it is necessary to do that. And not because the charges are going to get dropped magically, but because thoughtful people in responsible governments in the UK, in Europe, United States, hopefully Canada and others, have to step in. Freedom of expression, freedom of press is a core democratic value that our societies are built upon. There was a time when a strongly worded statement by the National Press Club or one of the other press freedom organizations or a sitting member of Congress or even a former member of Congress was the thing that opened the key to a jail cell like Jimmy's. The fact that someone of Jimmy's stature, experience, reputation, resources has had to endure this should be shocking to everybody, not just in this room, but around the world. We're dealing with a different type of threat to journalism and the work that we do, but also these fundamental values of what a democratic society is all about. And I, as someone who's deeply involved in press freedom efforts and has been since the moment that I was released from prison 8.5 years ago, it's hard, but I have to admit that we are not living up to the challenge. The fact that Jimmy spent this much time in prison, Caoilfhionn's other clients, Ruben and Maria, my Washington Post opinions colleague, Rana Ayub in India, the faces that we are the threats that we're facing right now are different. They're more extreme. They're graver, and they're much more personalized. And so I take this mission incredibly personally. And you know, when I first met Sebastien, probably 3 years ago now, I'd known Caoilfhionn. We had worked on various cases previously. We continue to work on not just this case, but others of Iranian journalists that I'm familiar with. that I've known, Maria's case, and so many others, this is a problem that's widening. It is starting to take over the entire globe. I'm hopeful that the incoming administration will pay a different kind of attention to this problem than they did in their first term starting 8 years ago. We did see instances of the first Trump administration intervening in certain cases, but it was much more opportunistic. And I think it's a time where we have to get back to protecting this value, standing up for the rights of journalists around the world to do their jobs, to bring information in a time and space when access to information has never been swifter, more widespread. Transparency should be the order of the day. But the ability to falsify news and falsify information is also much easier than it's ever been. So this is not something where we can take our foot off the gas. I mean, we have to continue to press forward. And you know, I also want to just acknowledge the incredible work that Sebastien has been doing on behalf of his dad. This is a long slog. It's a marathon, right? I think back to hearing from my captors and then from my wife, who was able to visit me in prison, about the efforts that my brother was undertaking here in the United States. He lives out in California. 2015, the year that I spent the entire year in prison, he made 20 trips to Washington, D.C. Your life is upended. I don't know how many times you've been to town over the last couple of years, Sebastien, how many times you've traveled to London, to other places. The physical toll, the emotional toll is disruptive and destructive to entire communities of people. And, you know, on behalf of myself personally, I just want to say how much I admire you and your ability and determination on behalf of your dad and your entire family, and on behalf of the National Press Club. Yes. On behalf of the Press Club and the Press Freedom Center, we're going to be with you now and until your dad comes home, and beyond that, because we think of you as a key ally in this global fight. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, in just a minute, I'm going to ask the panelists to come up, and they will take your questions. But let's talk about how we're going to do the questions. Please identify yourself with your name and your affiliation. And this is the National Press Club, so please ask a question. We've had some great speeches today. We don't need any more speeches. We just need some of your questions. And then for all of us here, including myself, I want to point out Mark Clifford, who's here. Mark is a former journalist with the South China Post, and he's the author of a book soon to be published by Simon & Schuster, The Troublemaker, and this is about Jimmy Lai, and a lot of great work has gone into this. So we all know bits and pieces of the story. Some of us have lived the story. But Mark has done a lot of work to put together the story in a comprehensive and attractive way. And so I encourage all of you who are on the live stream and here, you know, this is a great starting point or consolidation point in your thinking about this case. So thank you for being here today, Mark.
Thanks so much, Bill.
You bet. Could I ask the panelists to join me now? And we're going to take questions. And you can direct your question to to a specific panelist. Or you can ask generally, and they'll decide how to take a shot at it. Okay. So I thought Mark might ask the first question. Any questions then for this team? Liam, you have something? Put me on the spot.
I'll come up with another question. I guess, what are you thinking about, I guess, Caoilfhionn, you said that you expect the trial to extend into 2025. What concerns you the most about, that tactic? And what do you expect to
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Yeah, I mean, one of the difficulties is, so far we've seen very long delays, not only in Jimmy Lai's case, but we've seen the same in relation to the Stan News case and the Hong Kong 47. And we think that has been a tactic to delay. It's also a tactic which I'm increasingly seeing other governments tend to use in cases which involve journalists being imprisoned. And one of the reasons why it's so effective is that so many governments for so many years have said, we're going to wait to pressurise on securing release at the end of the trial process. Now, if you're dealing with a rule of law compliant country, that kind of approach makes sense. If your nationals being held in a country which is going to have a rule of law compliant trial, you may choose to stand back because there's independence of the judiciary and the rule of law, and then when the trial runs its course, you then talk about prison transfer, for example. That is simply not the right way to deal with states like China, like Russia, like Iran, who treat journalists like this. And we think it is a tactic that's been used. Now, we were pleased, obviously, to see that with the trial restarting again today, progress seems to have been relatively quick. So we'll see. The tactics they've used in Jimmy Lai's case so far have often included doing key things which coincide with holidays when the world is looking away. It wasn't a coincidence, for example, that the trial only started just before Christmas last year. Look, this is straight from the authoritarian playbook. Egypt does this all the time. Key hearings on the 26th and 27th of December, totally routine. In Jimmy Lai's case, when we saw him convicted of the spurious fraud charge, it came just at the same time as Thanksgiving, and it also came on the day when the UK government was in disarray and was in fact changing Prime Minister from Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak. And that partly explains why only one state on the day condemned that conviction, and it was the United States of America. And we are very grateful to the US and to the bipartisan support that we've had in the US on this case, because the US has shown real leadership in highlighting what's been happening to Jimmy Lai. And we obviously expect that to continue under the next administration also, and we're grateful for the supportive comments we've seen from President-elect Trump recently about this case. This is a key case. The US is right to take a leadership role on it, and long may it continue.
I know there's some folks here from Radio Free Asia. Do you have a question?
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think still optimistic to the case? Would you feel that is still optimistic to the case?
Sorry, one second. So, yeah, well, cautiously optimistic. We are now in a situation where, again, my father's been in jail for the last 4 years in solitary confinement. And it's people vote with their feet. People have seen this in Hong Kong. The attention that 1,900 political prisoners has brought to the place, it has been tremendously negative. Hong Kong's a financial center. Its currency is trust. It's trust that your contracts will be honored, the transaction will go through, whatnot. And there is no longer that element of trust if you put 1,900 political prisoners in jail. I mean, can you imagine if you're a bank sending a junior analyst or whatnot with his family to Hong Kong from America, and if I was the bank, I'd be like, well, the guy is American. Obviously, he believes that he has all these rights here. Why shouldn't he have them in Hong Kong, especially when Hong Kong says they do? And the political prisoners is a constant reminder of what Hong Kong was and what Hong Kong is no longer. So it is in their best interest to see my father released as soon as possible. So that gives me a bit of hope, and it costs them nothing. It will take them under 2 hours to put him on a plane and fly him to the UK or the US or wherever. So that is the optimism. Whether they see that and whether they want to keep going down this line of ruining this once great city is entirely up to them. Look, we're in a situation now where the prosecution have made their case. He's essentially, it's a very weak case. He's innocent on all of the allegations, and so we'll see what they do. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing on that? As someone who had one of these UN arbitrary detention working group decisions in my favor and has followed this process, this demands a lot more attention than it has received in Jimmy's case, but in all of these cases. This is the only international body that chimes in on this sort of case, and they don't make a determination of arbitrary detention every time. In cases here in the United States where people have been arbitrarily detained by foreign governments, it's often used as a basis for legal proceedings here in American courts. I don't know if that's the case in the UK or not. This is a very serious determination that, it doesn't sound particularly earth-shattering, but it is. I mean, it is an international acknowledgement that the charges against Jimmy Lai are spurious, are baseless, and that he's being held for political reasons. So I think the thing to do is to really highlight this and understand what these proceedings look like, because it's as official as it gets in this space, and is the basis for so many of these cases around the world.
Just going to add two quick things just after what was said there. So first of all, following up on what Sebastien said about political prisoners, and secondly, following up on what Jason said about the working group on arbitrary detention. So first of all, on political prisoners, here's a statistic which I think is shocking. In April 2019, according to the figures from the Hong Kong Democracy Council, there were 26 political prisoners in Hong Kong. And by June of this year, so 5 years later, there were 1,841. And it's now 1,900. So that's an increase of over 7,000% in the space of 5 years. Now, that is an exceptionally unusual trajectory. So that puts Hong Kong in a very tiny camp with some very concerning other countries. So Myanmar and Belarus are the only other countries worldwide which have any trajectory, anything like that. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, you may think, well, we're used to this, we see it, Iran does this, Russia does this. I think the difference is this. I think when people hear of a journalist being imprisoned in Russia or a journalist being imprisoned in Iran, they know they're not dealing with a rule of law compliant state. What's different about Hong Kong is that Hong Kong continues to pretend that it's a rule of law compliant place, it's an international business hub. It dresses itself in the clothing of a respectable state in a way that some of these other countries don't. And actually, we have got to put a pin in that lie. And we also think that's key to the leverage here, because we know that the Hong Kong and Chinese authorities want international investment to continue in Hong Kong. They want it to be business as usual in Hong Kong. And the message from us has got to be, it cannot be business as usual when you have 1,900 political prisoners behind bars, and when Jimmy Lai, age 77, is behind bars for being a journalist. That's what we've got to do. And then just on the working group on arbitrary detention point, I've worked in this field for about 25 years. The working group on arbitrary detention ruling in Jimmy Lai's case, which was released on Friday evening, just this weekend, which I think may partly also explain why it didn't get quite the same attention as it otherwise would have, just rather a graveyard slot it coming out on a Friday night. But it came out on Friday evening. It is one of the strongest rulings I've ever seen. It finds that he is arbitrarily detained under 4 separate categories, and it is a categoric, excoriating view of what Hong Kong has now become and how Hong Kong has changed in such a short space of time. It's also really important to say that although that is the official international body which looks at whether someone is arbitrarily detained under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and it has inbuilt into it an opportunity for China, which is the state in question, to explain its arguments as to why he's not arbitrarily detained. China declined to do that. So it was given multiple opportunities over a long period of time by the UN experts to engage, and it did not. So when you then see their 3 a.m. hysterical, aggressive press releases over the weekend, or you see the MFA China spokesperson's tweet, which just came out about an hour ago, which says this: Jimmy Lai is the principal mastermind and perpetrator behind the series of riots that shook Hong Kong. He's a lawbreaker and an agent and henchman of those hostile to China. So this has come from a Chinese spokesperson today. The statements they sent out over the weekend have come within hours of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruling being made public. And that is after them failing to engage with that process for a 2-year period. This is not a rule of law compliant state, and we have got to shine a light on China's outrageous behaviour. And that quote that we've seen there today, every time you see a pious statement from the Hong Kong authorities saying it's quite wrong that President Biden said X or Keir Starmer said Y, why is there no pious statement from the Hong Kong authorities criticising the MFA China spokesperson for saying Jimmy Lai is guilty before the trial has come to an end?
Hey, Keelan, I think it might be useful for people to hear what is that working group? How is that comprised? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that.
Yeah, so the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, they're independent experts. They're appointed through the UN Human Rights Council, which is the international body which monitors human rights issues and violations of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights internationally. So entirely independent, and indeed China is part of the process which appoints those experts. And it's interesting that you don't see China complaining ever about rulings from the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention in relation to other cases. It's very selective, and in the same way that their view of the rule of law is very selective. It's rule by law, not rule of law, and it's a situation where they want to use that phrase to try to silence people who criticise, but they want to amplify those who say Jimmy Lai is guilty. If anyone wants to know more about the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and the opinion itself, I urge you to look at the full opinion. And also you can see the membership, the international membership of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. And I entirely agree with Jason. That is the process that we have internationally which determines whether or not someone is arbitrarily detained. I and my colleagues, Jonathan, Jen Robinson, Tatiana Eatwell, have been working with Sebastien now for a number of years. And we could see right from the outset what this was. This was an arbitrary detention case in multiple ways. We could see that he was the victim of lawfare, weaponization of multiple laws. And we also could see the really serious humanitarian concerns, given his age and his conditions. We've been raising all of those issues. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has now made clear categorically that it agrees with us. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has made clear that she agrees with us. Multiple other UN Special Rapporteurs the same. Multiple states the same. We've had support from the US government, UK government, unanimous resolution this time last year from both houses of the Canadian Parliament, every single MP, every single senator. We just saw a very powerful debate in the Australian Senate in the last 24 hours because of the urgency of Jimmy Lai's case and the sentencing yesterday of the 45. Good support from Germany, good support from the European Union, including 2 powerful resolutions from the European Parliament. So the world is yet now united in what we need, and that is for Jimmy Lai to be immediately and unconditionally released. What we now need to do is turn that principle into practice before it's too late, and time is not on our side. We need to move quickly, and that's why we're so grateful for the support we have from people in the room and from everyone we've been meeting in Washington.
Terrific, thank you. Other questions for the panel? Mark, go ahead.
Nobody else, yeah.
Hey, I'm Mark Clifford. Sebastien, thanks, of course, for all the work you do for your dad, for the work, for the help you gave me in working on the book. I do believe, thanks Keelan and Jason, I do believe your father's going to be released sooner rather than later. And I think we've seen a lot of movement. What does he want to do? Does he want to stay in Hong Kong? Does he want to leave? What are his ambitions?
So the reason why he decided to stay in Hong Kong, and you know, I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision, was well, because he knew that as the publisher of Apple Daily, he and as someone who's been campaigning for democracy for the last 30 years, that he had a responsibility to his people. I mean, it was a very practical decision in that sense, because everybody told him to leave. Everybody said, look, you're 73, you should retire in London, and either way, you're a better advocate abroad, right? Why risk the almost certainty that you to get arrested? My father obviously had a very hard decision to make of whether he wanted to sacrifice or risk the rest of his life in standing for his belief and standing for his people, or leave and have a perfectly respectable existence elsewhere. But he knew that if he left, he'd be opening up his journalists to persecution. Unfortunately, that's something that authoritarian regimes now do. They arrest many journalists. And he believed that if he stayed in Hong Kong, he'd be able to act as a lightning rod, take most of the ire from the government and therefore protect his journalists. And the other people campaigned with him. And as a result of that, he decided to stay. And that's, for me, it's the campaigning for the last 30 years is incredible, but it's pretty heroic. So I'm incredibly proud of him. But it's that was the decision he made, and so I think if given the opportunity, I'm sure that he would leave now. I mean, he's done all that he can in protecting his people.
Hi, my name is Christina. I work for VOA. Sebastian, we heard from your father in this last hearing. What were your thoughts? Is this the first time that you hear a statement from him in the last year? How do you think the process is going for him?
So it's, as we alluded before, it's a complete sham trial. It's a trial where there's 3 government-appointed judges, no jury, allegations, unfortunately, of witnesses being tortured. A few of my father's colleagues who are testifying against him don't get their sentencing until after my father is sentenced. So it's completely a horrible situation with this, this cast of character whose life the Hong Kong government have ruined essentially to put up this show trial. My father giving testimony is so it's the first time. It's not the first time he's given testimony. He given on another a case before a few years ago, but it's the first time in the national security law trial that he is giving testimony. And hearing from the news that I get at the same time as everybody else here in this room, I'm happy to see that he is still holding strong mentally and spiritually. I've also had people say his health has gotten much worse, and you could see that from the massive weight loss that he has, and him not being able to attend trial on at least one occasion before because of how sick he was. So it is incredibly heartbreaking, but in the end of the day, I'm incredibly proud of what he's doing, and I think he knows that he is also doing the right thing. So if he has to take the stand to make the same point that he made through his actions, then so be it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to his statements and to one day seeing him again.
Just in terms of today, obviously Jimmy Lai is on trial in Hong Kong, but journalism is on trial in Hong Kong too. And one of the most powerful quotes, I thought, from today's proceedings in Hong Kong, which was widely reported by a BBC journalist online, was him saying, "All I did was to carry a torch behind reality, just to comment on what's actually happening in society." And that's right. And that's why I say journalism's on trial. So what he did was he shone a light on what was happening in Hong Kong. So he provided information to people. That was his goal right from the outset. And it's why it's so critical now we shine a light on what's happening in Hong Kong and the disgraceful sham trial which is proceeding in Hong Kong now under this law which shouldn't exist, targeting this man who simply should not be in the dock and who should be free to be at home with Sebastien and with his family and spending his late 70s, as other people in their late 70s do, with their family, surrounded by loved ones, not in the position he's in now.
Thank you. I guess this is for Sebastien, but anyone can comment. It's not widely discussed that Jimmy Lai is Catholic. We're a country that just went through an election. The number of Catholic voters in the 3 states that really made a difference far exceed the margin of victory in those states. Do you have a message for Catholics in the U.S.? And can you just comment on your dad's faith, what it means to him, and what your thoughts are about that now?
Yeah, sure. So I am also Catholic. look, I think in being Catholic, and you don't necessarily have to be a Catholic to hold these beliefs, but you have a fundamental belief of right and wrong. And it's not just this moral gray area where we're all floating around. There is something that is greater than oneself. My father knew that, and that's why for the last almost 30 years now, more than 30 years, he campaigned for democracy and freedom. He believed that as a person, as a human, and indeed as a Catholic, that was the right thing to do. That giving freedom to the people of Hong Kong through his media was a way to do right by himself, by the people of Hong Kong, and by God. His faith has been a strong pillar in what he has been doing for the last 30 years, but also in his incarceration. As we said before, obviously it's incredibly heartbreaking that he spent the last almost 4 years in solitary confinement. But in solitary confinement, it's you and God. So I know his faith has been a strong source of support, and indeed many American Catholics have heard of my father's story and have been incredibly moved by this man who seems to be, who seems to morally be unmovable, because he knows that he is doing what is right. I mean, unfortunately, though, because they know how important his Catholic faith is to him, they have decided to deny him his right to Holy Communion, citing some administrative reasons. It's not only very petty to do that; it also shows you where the Hong Kong government is now. A lot of these people in the Hong Kong government are Catholic. Hong Kong is a very Catholic place, and so they know exactly what they are doing. I'm just happy to see that, at least from my father taking a stand, that he is undeterred. He knows that that God is with him, and that in doing the right thing, there is trials and tribulations.
Yes, sir.
For Mrs. Gallagher, if I may. Give the mic, please.
Yes. Here you go, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallagher. Regarding the last issue, what is your attempt to even, let's have the Vatican or someone intercede that spiritual benefit to Jimmy Lai can be attained, because no one has really any access to him now. And since the Chinese do not recognize him as a British citizen, but cannot deny that he's a Catholic, have you attempted to ask someone to seek to provide spiritual strength through ordinary Catholic means? Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of things. First of all, obviously, this is an issue which we've raised as a matter of concern with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture. It's also an issue relevant to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief. So it's part and parcel of the oppressive conditions which he's experiencing. We did have, I just was checking the date here, in November 2023, senior Catholic leaders from around the world signed a petition calling on the Hong Kong authorities to immediately and unconditionally release Jimmy Lai. We're very grateful for their support. And in terms of who it is, it's 10 senior Roman Catholic leaders from around the world representing dioceses and archdioceses across the US, India, Australia, Lithuania, Canada, the UK, Ireland and Nigeria. And the words they used this time last year was, Mr. Lai's persecution for supporting pro-democracy causes has gone on long enough. There's no place for such cruelty and oppression in a territory that claims to uphold the rule of law and respect the right to freedom of expression. In standing up for his beliefs and committing himself through his faith to challenge autocracy and repression, Jimmy Lai has lost his business, been cut off from his family, and then had surpassed 1,000 days in prison while facing the prospect of many more years of incarceration to come. He's 75 years old. He must be freed now. He's now 77. We're approaching the 4-year mark. We are grateful and honoured by the support that we've had from Catholic leaders around the world. And of course, we'd welcome anything further which the Catholic Church and the hierarchy could do to ensure that this Catholic is freed, as well as this journalist and British national is freed.
Thanks so much. Liam.
Sorry, Keelan, would you be able to speak a little bit more about what Jimmy's case underscores about the broader downfall of press freedom and civil liberties in Hong Kong since the NSL was enacted in 2020, and especially just reflecting on this past year? Article 23 was enacted earlier this year. Stan News journalists were sentenced for sedition. Yesterday, obviously, the 45 were sentenced under the NSL as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, Liam, and thanks for all the work you've been doing on this case and on this issue. We're very grateful. So Hong Kong has plummeted down the rankings. So the Reporters Without Borders press freedom rankings had Hong Kong a decade ago right up towards the top, and it's now languishing around 140 out of 180 countries worldwide. Similarly, when you look at the Committee to Protect Journalists analysis, you can see how far Hong Kong has fallen in a very short space of time. And when the national security law was brought in, imposed, of course, from mainland China, you'll recall that multiple states around the world, including the US and the UK, Canada, many others, and multiple United Nations experts expressed grave concern about what it might do to freedom of expression and civil liberties in Hong Kong. And they were right to sound the alarm, because now in 2024 we can see what Hong Kong has become. Hong Kong has become a place where if you wear the wrong t-shirt, or you sing the wrong song, or you don't sing the right song, or you publish a newspaper which says things that people don't like, or you dare to exercise your internationally protected political rights by organising a primary, you can find yourself imprisoned. So Jimmy Lai is the most high-profile and oldest political prisoner, and declared this year a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International. It's of course right that we're focusing on his case because of how serious his case is in itself. But his case was also designed to send a chill down the spine of anyone who might want to wear a t-shirt or sing a song or post a tweet or say anything which might stand up to Hong Kong or Beijing's leaders. And it was designed to have a chilling effect on others. And it's why what's happening in the Hong Kong courtroom this week is so incredibly powerful, because although we know it's highly unlikely to change the result, because the trial is a stacked deck, it's an unfair process, the national security law has an almost 100% conviction rate. So we know the trajectory in the courtroom is going one way, towards finding him guilty and giving him an excessive sentence. We know that's what's happening, but it's so important in other ways because of the message it sends. And something that was so powerful, I saw in many of the reports overnight, people who'd spoken to individuals in the queue who were explaining why they were queuing and why they were waiting to try to get into the courtroom. And so many of them said they're inspired by Jimmy Lai's bravery. And I am also inspired by Jimmy Lai's bravery, and I'm inspired by the bravery of his son, Sebastien. And I'm also inspired by the bravery of the Hong Kongers in the queue, who continue to stand there and do what they can in their own sphere of influence to speak truth to power and to show solidarity with Jimmy Lai. And similarly, all of the Hong Kongers who stood in the rain with their cell phones, with the lights, you know, that very powerful image that's on Apple Daily's final cover, you know, is an indication of you can do all you can to try to break the system and to destroy the rule of law, but you cannot destroy the human spirit. And I think we've got to be more Jimmy, all of us in the room. And I think we've got to ensure that we don't let these tactics get to us. And we continue to speak out, shine a light. And ultimately, you know, I started by referring to those images outside and what can be done with creativity. We've seen that incredible deal very, very recently, while war is waging in Ukraine, which has nevertheless seen the largest prisoner swap arrangement since the Cold War between the US and Russia, and with input from so many other countries worldwide, including Germany, Canada, Ireland, UK, etc. And it seems to us, with creativity and political will, you can do what might seem impossible. And it feels to me, weeks after we've seen Pastor David Lin released from China, thanks to work by the US, shortly after we've seen Australian journalist Cheng Lai released from China through good work by the Australians, after we've seen the two Michaels from Canada released from China after work by Canada, and after we've seen Richard O'Halloran, an Irish businessman, released from China after work by Ireland, seems to us we must be able to do what they managed to do in those cases and bring Jimmy Lai home to his family before it's too late.
Thank you. We're at 10. I'll take another question if there is one. If not, I will close with this. I am grateful to all three of you for your participation today. You've set a very high bar for what the new Press Freedom Center hopes to accomplish. the quality and the depth of the presentation, the value of this presentation. I am so grateful for this, and it's a great start. One idea coming out of this is that I welcome the working group for arbitrary detention to come to the National Press Club with every report that they issue, but particularly with this one, and explain their work. We will be glad to give them a platform and a forum and not do it at Friday at the end of the day. And so thank you for inspiring that thought through your presentation. The club has 2,500 members. They have networks and they have audiences in the millions, and they are engaging those networks to try to help bring Jimmy Lai home. We hope to see him here soon. We hope you're with him soon. We look forward to that day. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to the panel.